you hear people say things like, "Oh, been hearing it for years now on the alt scene." Spell literally means to spell someone, or grimoire's grammar. And that's all true, of course, but what's really... I was at the beach this morning, big windy day, but there's one thing to say that, there's one thing to be like the truthers afraid of that. It's another thing again to put it into practice. Now, there's an art of wordcraft, an art of language, an art of debating, an art of speaking and addressing someone in a certain manner that will bamboozle them. And you're not doing anything that's not necessarily negative, necessarily wicked, but you could be a very useful skill within your life. I'll give you an example. There is a video by... Now, let me preface that by saying most people are just software programs that they're running, built of opinions and assumptions and belief packages that have been written into their subconscious and conscious minds like a software program. And when a software program is written to deal with a certain script it's not familiar with, it sits there, it either ignores it and waits for an upgrade, or it crashes. In this world we live in today, because people are not educated properly anymore, they're completely indoctrinated. The media treats people like children, adults like children, and the reduction of language down to things like texting and emojicons and emojis and things like that has made people even less able to deal with information that is outside the programming of their belief package. Now, I'll give you a good example of that. Last year I was watching a video by Sargon of Akkad, and you know the guy, he's a very well-spoken English chap. He makes a lot of good points. He's in the alt-right, but his politics wouldn't necessarily be mine, but like anything, I respect his viewpoints, certainly when he talks about things like freedom of speech and so on. You can't argue there at all. But the man was out campaigning around the time he was running for, I think, UKIP in the English elections, British elections. And this young chap came up to him claiming to be an anarchist to debate with him. And the young guy seemed like a nice enough, and probably is a nice enough guy. But it was the most remarkable thing to see his script and then eventually his internal computer crashing. And how it crashed. Because Sargon of Akkad completely bamboozled him. How? But just holding a mirror up to him, to his inconsistencies in terms of his so-called beliefs versus his reality. He was just a package of conditioning, this young guy. It started off by saying that he should say this to Sargon of Akkad, you shouldn't be allowed to say certain things. And he goes, of course I should. And then the young guy said something like, what makes you think you can? And he goes, because I'm an Englishman in a country where freedom of expression is guaranteed by law. And that was the beginning. You could actually see the guys, if you were able to watch his eyes, I bet you could see his pupils dilating at that point. Then the guy turned around and said he was an anarchist, and he said he was in favour of Britain staying in the European Union. And Sargon of Akkad quite rightly said, hold on a second, if you're an anarchist, you believe in less government, you believe in local government or local administration, whatever the definition of anarchy is. And to actually be an anarchist in favour of the European Union, it shows that you don't really know what being an anarchist is. And that was true. He didn't. It just was a word. He had just a label he had attached himself to. And by the time this ended, what the young guy who had started out as being quite reasonable and likeable had just descended into mental illness, like so many of these SJWs, which because he could not, his programming crashed. And that's what they mean by bamboozling and using language. In ancient Ireland, they used to have these kind of Olympic games at a place called Talty. And it wasn't only things like sport, running, boxing, travelling. It was also mind sports. And one of the most popular events was debating circles. And people would sit around watching debates. And the debates would be, what would make them amazing would be the use that someone could actually turn language into a weapon that someone could use against themselves. This was very highly valued in Irish society. This is where the term to talk blarney comes from. The Irish talk blarney. This was because a guy called Blarney, an Irish lord, was meeting with Queen Elizabeth I back in the Elizabethan days, and she said the Irish with their Blarney, this Blarney, meaning the Irish, just the way they just talk, they'll talk circles around you. And that comes from that ancient druidic bardic craft of the use of language. Still exists in Ireland to a certain extent to these days, but unfortunately the current generation of Irish people, a lot of them are just like Generation Z, millennials, who are just like anywhere else. But we'll see what happens in the future. And so you have that's why the Irish have that kind of thing where they're considered like, we're considered like really good with words and sort of wordsmiths. You get the whole thing, we're considered like the best writers and the best orators, and we're very highly valued as actors and stuff like that. And you have that kind of Irish sort of like Blarney, the gift of the gab. You see Irish, like Dave Allen, who was a very popular Irish, he was more of a philosopher than a comedian. He used to sit on British TV in the 70s and just talk. And he would use that. Now, an example of how you bamboozle people and watch their program explode. Now, when you're confronted, when you're a sack of conditioned responses, and you are confronted with new information, there's two paths you can take. You can either blow up like an SJW and start screaming and shouting and roaring and screaming and stamping your feet, or you can walk away, take it on board and try to process it. Very few people do that because human beings don't like to be told they're wrong. It's just human nature. But if you bamboozle them, you can get away with it because you can actually expose them. Like, here's one. I just thought the other day, what would be the best thing for me to walk into a bunch of SJWs and entertain myself while bamboozling them at the same time? And I've come up with the perfect spell to use on SJWs, right? Walk into a bunch of SJWs and say, Islam is right about women. Islam is correct about women. Okay, what have you done here? They can't accuse you of being Islamophobic because you're extolling a virtue, or, well, you're not extolling a virtue, but you're aligning your own beliefs with Islam. So therefore, you cannot be called Islamophobic. At the same time, they're processing that through their SJW conditioned gears of emotions and infantile responses. If they were to then say, that's offensive, that makes them Islamophobic, because then they would have to admit that Islam, to some degree, treats women badly. So they're damned if they do, and they're damned if they don't. They cannot use anything against you, and then they'll just scream in your face, and you've bamboozled them. And that's why people shouldn't be afraid of these SJWs and these people who scream and shout at these protests, because that's all they have. They cannot argue or debate. They can only scream and shout you down. And the reason why this is, they are bamboozled by life. And this is why there's a huge debt cult among the current millennials. There's no life. There's nothing for them. If you're stuck in a perceived past of being oppressed somehow from your past, or have an issue with somebody or something from your past, and you're concentrating on that, what you're really telling to yourself and the world is, you see no future, you see no joy ahead of you, no satisfaction ahead of you, no happiness ahead of you, because you realize that you've lost the thing in the past that gave you life, gave you the spark of vitality, and you can't find or are unable to find in going forward, or see it in the future, so you go mental. And so you attack the past. You attacked the past and what it represents and who's in it. So it's like, the SJWs, it's straight white men, it's this, that, and the other. They don't see a future. And that's why they're obsessed with debt. This is why I've been saying that, and this is why, like, Twitter and Donald Trump, he's, like I said, he's like a wordsmith. He'll just have to say one, two things and he will make them go. He'll make millions and millions of educated people all over the world ruin their days, have absolute psychiatric episodes. And that's because they cannot go back and change the election, but at the results. But at the same time, they can't see anything in the future to give them what they want. And that's why I think next year, 2020, will be what 2012 was supposed to be. And 2020, you're going to see big changes in human society. I think you will begin to see the end of the SJW culture. It will begin to peter out. It's almost certain that Trump will get a second. I'm not saying I'm pro-Trump or anything. I'm just saying I observe the psychic weather. And like any weather, if it's a sunny day, I put the washing on the line. This kind of thing. You use what's in the psychic weather for your own life, whatever it is, without being attached to it. And I think 2020 will be a remarkable year of change. You will see a lot of the hysteria that's led up to this point peter out, and you'll see an adjustment, like the tarot card, the adjustment in the Thoth deck. You'll see things coming into balance again. You will see a lot of these SJWs. Well, actually, a lot of millennials will kill themselves. So will a lot of boomer liberal types. And it's quite frightening. This is the most frightening part of it, that they'll take their kids out with them at the same time too. That's not my job to stop that. Not your job to stop that. It's an unfortunate aspect of society you just have to live with. And that's what will happen. So 2020 is the age... The age of the bamboozle is over. You'll have the ones who are bamboozled by the last, say, 4 or 5 years. You are screaming and shouting. You will see them reach adjustment or die.